A sick and nearly broke pharmacist in Atlanta signed away the rights to a drink he had invented in 1888 for a sum that today would be worth only a few $1,000s. Within a few months he was dead, buried in a cemetery so quietly that he never knew what he had given away. The formula he sold off in pieces would go on to build one of the most valuable brands on earth, pour into nearly every country on the planet, and outlast empires, wars, and the man's own name. A drink you can buy today from a vending machine for pocket change was born out of a Civil War wound, a morphine addiction, and a recipe that, for years, contained cocaine. That sounds insane, but the fact that a battlefield injury and a banned narcotic gave rise to the most recognized product in human history tells you something. Coca-Cola was never just a soft drink. It never was. So how did a medicinal syrup, mixed in a brass kettle in a backyard, become a symbol of America itself, sold in more countries than the United Nations has members? How did a 5-cent tonic survive 2 world wars, a self-inflicted marketing disaster, and a century of lawsuits to end up in your refrigerator right now? To understand that, you have to go back to a wounded soldier in the years right after the American Civil War. His name was John Pemberton, and he was a Confederate veteran and trained pharmacist living in Georgia. In the final weeks of the war, he had been slashed across the chest by a saber. Like countless wounded men of his era, he was given morphine for the pain, and like so many of them, he became addicted. Morphine addiction was the opioid crisis of its day, quietly destroying veterans across the South. Pemberton, who knew chemistry, set out to invent a cure for the very addiction that had its hooks in him. He began experimenting with the coca leaf from South America, the source of cocaine, and the African cola nut, a source of caffeine. He blended them into a wine, calling it Pemberton's French wine coca, and sold it as a nerve tonic, a brain stimulant, and a remedy for exhausted, anxious, addicted patients. It was alcohol, cocaine, and caffeine in a single glass. They had a problem in that era, and Pemberton thought he had the solution, and he was not alone or even unusual. The late 1800s were the golden age of the patent medicine, when drugstores were lined with bottles promising to cure every ailment, many of them laced with alcohol, opium, or cocaine, and backed by nothing but bold advertising. Pemberton's Coca Tonic was one entry in a crowded, lightly regulated market of miracle elixirs. What set it apart was not the medicine, it was what happened to it next. Then the law changed under his feet. In 1886, Atlanta and its county passed local prohibition, banning the sale of alcohol. Overnight, Pemberton's wine tonic was illegal, so he went back to his equipment and reworked the recipe, stripping out the alcohol and replacing it with sugar syrup, and adding more of the coca and cola. He carried a jug of the new syrup to Jacob's Pharmacy in downtown Atlanta, where it was mixed with carbonated water and put on sale for 5 cents a glass. His bookkeeper, a man named Frank Robinson, gave it a name and wrote it out in the flowing script still used today: Coca-Cola. The 2 C's came straight from its 2 key ingredients, the coca leaf and the cola nut. In its very first year, it sold only a handful of glasses a day. Pemberton had invented an icon, and he had no idea. Because Pemberton was still sick and still addicted, and the morphine was expensive, convinced his strange medicinal soda would never amount to much, he began selling off pieces of the formula to various Atlanta businessmen to raise cash. By the time he died in 1888, he had signed away essentially his entire stake for a total of somewhere around $2,000. He died believing he had created a modest patent medicine. He never saw a cent of the fortune to come. The man who would have controlled one of the great commercial empires of the modern world died nearly penniless, still chasing the next dose. That was the price of inventing Coca-Cola. The man who actually built the empire was another Atlanta pharmacist named Asa Candler. Through a series of shrewd purchases, Candler gathered up the scattered rights to the formula and, by the early 1890s, owned the whole thing outright, for a total cash outlay of around $2,300. It may be the greatest bargain in business history. Candler was not a chemist. He was a salesman, and a ruthlessly effective one. He blanketed the country with advertising, plastered the logo on calendars, clocks, trays, and signs, and handed out coupons for free first classes, one of the earliest mass coupon campaigns ever run. By 1895, Candler could boast that Coca-Cola was being sold in every state and territory in the nation. He had taken a failed headache remedy and turned it into a habit. The medicine was quietly becoming a national drink. In an age before refrigerators in every home, the soda fountain was a social institution, the place where Americans gathered for a cold treat, and Coca-Cola made itself the star of the counter. The drink shed its medicinal label and became something better, a small, affordable pleasure, an everyday ritual. But the caffeine and the secrecy drew suspicion. In 1911, the United States government actually put the product on trial, seizing dozens of barrels and kegs of Coca-Cola syrup and arguing in a case formally titled United States versus 40 barrels and 20 kegs of Coca-Cola that the caffeine in it was a harmful additive. The company fought the case for years. The legal fight pushed Coca-Cola to rein in its caffeine levels and helped shape early American food safety law. Even as it conquered the soda fountain, the drink was already drawing the scrutiny of a nervous government. But the most consequential decision came in 1899, and it almost looked careless. Two lawyers from Chattanooga approached Candler and asked to buy the right to bottle Coca-Cola, so it could be sold sealed and portable instead of only at a soda fountain. Candler did not believe bottling had much of a future, so he sold them the bottling rights to the entire United States for $1, a dollar he reportedly never even bothered to collect. That $1 deal built the entire global bottling system, the network of independent bottlers that would carry Coke into every town and eventually every country on Earth. They had a problem: how to spread a fountain drink across a continent. The solution was a bottle and a $1 contract, and it worked beyond anyone's imagination. To stop counterfeiters, the company later commissioned a uniquely shaped bottle, the curved contour bottle introduced in 1915, so distinctive you could recognize it in the dark or by a single broken shard. The bottle became as famous as the drink inside it, one of the few packages on Earth instantly identifiable by touch alone. And around the product, the company built a second kind of armor: secrecy. The full recipe, known internally as Merchandise 7X, was turned into a legend of its own, said to be known to only a handful of executives and locked away, today displayed inside a purpose-built vault in Atlanta that tourists paid to stand beside. Whether the secrecy is truly necessary or mostly theatre, it worked as marketing. A drink that is, at bottom, sugar, water, caffeine and flavouring was wrapped in the mystique of a guarded treasure. The formula was ordinary, the story around it was priceless. But there was still the matter of what was actually in it. In its early years, Coca-Cola really did contain cocaine, drawn from the coca leaf, in small but real amounts. At the time, this was barely controversial because cocaine was legal and common in tonics and medicines. But around the turn of the century, attitudes shifted, and they shifted along the ugliest lines of the era. In the segregated American South, white authorities began spreading racist fears that cocaine use among black Americans was fueling crime, a claim with no medical basis and deep roots in prejudice. Under that pressure, Coca-Cola removed the active cocaine from its formula around 1903, more than a decade before federal law would have required it. That sounds like the end of the story, but it is not. To keep the name and the flavour, the company kept using coca leaf, just with the cocaine chemically stripped out first. To this day, Coca-Cola is flavoured with a decocainized coca extract, processed at a single chemical plant in New Jersey, the only facility in the United States legally permitted to import coca leaves, mostly from Peru and Bolivia. The leftover cocaine is sold off for legal medical use. The drink that fills your glass is still, quietly, tied to a coca leaf supply chain stretching back to the Andes. The cocaine is gone, the coca never left. If you are finding this video interesting, hit subscribe and follow me on Spotify. We dig into the hidden histories behind everyday drinks every week, and you will not want to miss what is coming next. There is one more number from this era that is almost hard to believe. For 73 years, from 1886 all the way to 1959, the price of a standard bottle of Coca-Cola stayed fixed at exactly 5 cents, 1 nickel. Through the Spanish-American War, the First World War, the Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, and the Second World War, the price did not move. Part of the reason was almost comic. The bottling contracts had locked in low prices, and the country filled up with vending machines built to take a single nickel and nothing else. The machines could not make change, so raising the price even to 6 cents was a mechanical nightmare. At one point the company grew so desperate it actually asked the US Treasury to mint a 7.5-cent coin. The Treasury said no. For 3 generations of Americans, a Coke cost a nickel, and that fixed little price became part of the country's idea of itself. Then the Second World War turned a national drink into a global one. When America entered the war, the head of Coca-Cola, Robert Woodruff, issued a now famous order that every man in uniform should be able to get a bottle of Coca-Cola for 5 cents, wherever he was and whatever it cost the company. It was patriotism and it was genius marketing at the same time. The company secured a government exemption from wartime sugar rationing on the grounds that it was supplying the troops, while competitors were strangled by the same rationing. Coca-Cola then shipped entire bottling plants overseas, following the soldiers. Company men were sent to the front lines with a quasi-military status, nicknamed the Coca-Cola Colonels, and they built 64 bottling plants across the war zones of Europe and the Pacific. American soldiers drank billions of bottles, and to a generation of GIS, an ice-cold Coke tasted like home. By the end of the war, Coca-Cola had bottling infrastructure and loyal customers on multiple continents. The war had globalized the brand at taxpayer-assisted speed. But back home, the all-American image had an ugly underside. For decades, Coca-Cola marketed itself as the wholesome drink of white America, and largely ignored or avoided black consumers, even as it sold in a segregated South where some stores displayed Coke signs over coloured entrances. The company's leadership was tied to the white Southern establishment. One of its chairmen openly backed a segregationist governor of Georgia. Pepsi saw the opening. Starting in the 1940s, it hired a pioneering team of black salesmen and marketed directly to African American customers, a market Coke had snubbed, and used its own relative openness as a selling point. The so-called Cola Wars were not only about taste, they were fought along the fault lines of American race and class. The drink that sold itself as the essence of a united, happy America was, for a long time, quietly drawing the same colour lines as the country around it. But the war has a darker chapter, on the other side of the front line. Coca-Cola had been operating in Germany since the 1920s, and through the 1930s its German subsidiary thrived under a manager named Max Keith, even sponsoring the 1936 Berlin Olympics, its banners hanging beside Nazi swastikas. When the war cut Germany off from the American parent company and from the secret syrup, the German branch could no longer make Coca-Cola at all. So Keith improvised a brand new drink from whatever wartime scraps he could find, leftover apple fibers from cider presses, whey from cheese making, and beet sugar. He needed a name, told his team to use their imagination. The German word is fantasy, and a salesman blurted out Fanta. That is the literal origin of Fanta. It was invented to keep a Coca-Cola factory running inside Nazi Germany. After the war, the company absorbed Fanta and turned it into the global orange soda sold today. Most people sipping a Fanta have no idea it was born in the wartime economy of the Third Reich, mixed from the leftovers of leftovers in a country at war with the brand's own homeland. The same company, the same decade, fueled both Allied soldiers and the German home front. One drink for the men storming the beaches, another for the country they were fighting. Profit, it turned out, could pour in both directions at once. By the second half of the 20th century, Coca-Cola was no longer selling a drink. It was selling a feeling and an image. Here is where one of the most famous myths needs correcting. You have probably heard that Coca-Cola invented the modern image of Santa Claus, the jolly fat man in the red and white suit, supposedly coloured to match the Coke logo. It is a great story, and it is not true. The red-suited Santa already existed in American illustration decades before. Coke touched him, drawn by artists like Thomas Nast back in the 1860s. What Coca-Cola actually did, starting in 1931 with the painter Haddon Sundblom, was popularise and standardise that image so relentlessly, year after year, that the world came to treat it as definitive. Coke did not invent Santa. It did something almost more impressive. It bought a piece of folklore and advertised it so hard that millions of people now believe the company created it. That is the real power on display, not the drink, but the marketing. And occasionally, that marketing machine misfired spectacularly. By the 1960s and 70s, Coca-Cola had become a kind of edible flag for the United States. During the Cold War, it stood as a symbol of American capitalism, so potent that it was effectively banned in much of the communist world. And for decades, the only major markets on Earth without it were a tiny handful of isolated states. In 1971, the company aired a commercial of young people on a hilltop singing about wanting to buy the world a Coke and keep it company, turning a soft drink into a dreamy anthem of global harmony. The drink had become shorthand for an entire way of life, which is exactly why what came next hit so hard. By the 1980s, Pepsi was gaining ground, winning blind taste tests with a sweeter flavour in its famous Pepsi Challenge. Rattled, Coca-Cola did something close to unthinkable. In April 1985, it scrapped its secret century-old formula and replaced it with a sweeter recipe the public called New Coke. The reaction was a national uproar. People hoarded old Coke, flooded the company with angry calls, and treated the change like a personal betrayal. A news anchor interrupted a soap opera to break the story. Just 79 days later, the company surrendered and brought back the original as Coca-Cola Classic. A national news anchor cut into a live broadcast to announce the return, and a US senator rose on the floor of Congress to call it a moment of meaning for the country. People had wept and protested over a soft drink. The whole episode is now taught as one of the great marketing blunders in history, though sales actually surged afterward, which led cynics to wonder if the company had planned it all along. It had not. But the lesson was clear. Coca-Cola no longer belonged only to the company. People felt they owned it. You cannot quietly change something that an entire culture has decided is theirs. Today, Coca-Cola is sold in more than 200 countries and territories. In nearly every corner of the planet, the company famously claims that Coke is the second most understood word on Earth, after OK. The drink the world swallows by the ocean has become one of the most powerful brands ever built, and with that power has come a long shadow. In Mexico, which has among the highest per-person consumption of Coca-Cola products anywhere, public health researchers have linked heavy soda consumption to soaring rates of obesity and diabetes, and in some rural towns, bottled Coke became cheaper and more reliably available than clean drinking water, woven so deeply into local life that it even appears in religious rituals. The same sugar story that runs through tea and coffee runs through this bottle, only more concentrated, and a single can holds close to an entire day's worth of recommended added sugar. In India, at a plant in a village called Platshimada, residents accused the company of draining and contaminating their groundwater, and after years of protest and legal battles, the plant was shut down. Coca-Cola has faced water disputes from India to Latin America because it takes several litres of fresh water to produce a single litre of a drink that is mostly water and sugar. And the company has been caught funding research designed to shift blame for obesity away from sugary drinks and towards simple lack of exercise. The empire that began as a cure for addiction now sells a product that public health officials worry we are addicted to. The scale is almost difficult to picture. The company and its bottlers sell well over 1 billion servings of their drinks every single day in over 200 countries, a reach wider than almost any government, religion, or language on earth. For most of modern history, there were only a couple of countries you genuinely could not buy a Coke in, isolated states cut off by politics rather than taste. A drink mixed in a backyard kettle in 1886 had become one of the most universal objects humans have ever made, more widespread than clean water in some of the very places it is sold. That is the strangest part of the whole story. The thing is everywhere, and almost no one stops to ask how it got there, or what it cost along the way. So the next time you crack open a can of something you bought for spare change without a second thought, remember what it carries. It carries a wounded Confederate soldier chasing a cure for the morphine that was killing him. It carries a backyard brass kettle, a bookkeeper's looping handwriting, and an inventor who died broke believing he had made nothing. It carries a $1 bottling deal, a coca leaf supply chain that still runs to the Andes, and a 5-cent price that held for 73 years. It carries soldiers in 2 world wars, a soda invented inside Nazi Germany, a Santa Claus the company borrowed and sold back to the world, and the wells of an Indian village. The drink that was born from a war wound and a banned narcotic that a sick man sold for almost nothing is sitting in your hand right now, cold, fizzing, ordinary, waiting to be noticed. Coca-Cola was never just a soft drink. It never was, and it never will be. If this story surprised you, subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden histories behind everyday drinks. We have got a lot more coming.